Endtime prophecy and the revelation of Jesus Christ. The prophecies contained in the books of Daniel, Revelation, and the Gospels have many levels. Each one is valid, but only if approached from a sincere desire to know and obey the truth. The revelation is an integral part of the whole message of God in the Bible, and the key to understanding the book of Revelation. There are three main ways of interpreting the prophecies in Daniel and the Revelation, and they are all valid to some extent, as long as they are taken in their proper perspective. The first and least valid interpretation is that the events prophesied in the Revelation have already been fulfilled. Certainly, the events of 70 AD fulfilled Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of the temple, Luke 21 verse 6, and about the encirclement of Jerusalem by the Roman armies, Luke 21 verse 20. It is debatable whether there were great signs and earthquakes and distress at the time of the Roman conquest, but if you were a Jew in Jerusalem at the time, you could, no doubt, give a convincing argument that this was what Jesus was talking about. Then there was the year 1666, with its ominous 666. It was the culmination of a time when an entire third of the Earth's population perished through the plague. London was destroyed in a cataclysmic fire, and many Christians from small communitarian sects were burned and persecuted as heretics by a tyrannical institutional church. All through the ages there have been religious groups proclaiming the end of the world and the time of the fulfillment of the prophecies. However, the major and crucial point against the argument that the prophecies have all been fulfilled is that Jesus says, "And then they shall see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and great glory," Luke 21 verse 27, near the end of a sermon about the fulfillment of the end-time prophecies. It is emphasized in Matthew's version of the same sermon that this second coming is visible and tangible to all people, Matthew 24 verse 27 and Matthew 24 verse 30, and that it marks the destruction of all who rebel against God. The Revelation says that this is the beginning of the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, Revelation 11:15, Revelation 19 verses 11 to 21, and Revelation 10 verses 1 to 4. These events obviously have not happened yet. The second way of interpreting the prophecies is to skip over historic occurrences and to view them as symbolic of the battle between good and evil, where love appears to lose but ends up magnificently triumphant. Every Christian has his or her own tribulation to go through, 2 Timothy 3 verse 12, and we each experience the coming of Christ in our own life if we hold on to the truth. The Revelation appears to speak of the judgment that is relevant to people of all times, not just the end times, Revelation 20 verses 12 to 13. This is a safe interpretation, but there are too many specifics about times and events for it to be the only valid interpretation. These prophecies consistently predict a worldwide crisis of a magnitude beyond ever seen in history, and one that will never come again, Matthew 24 verse 21, Mark 13 verse 19, and Daniel 12 verse 1. It is a time which represents the peak of power for the forces of evil, but it ends with the supernatural destruction, or at the very least the imprisonment of those same forces. Revelation 6 verses 16 to 17, Revelation 11 verse 18, and Revelation 20 verses 10 to 15. One basic theme of the Revelation is that the meek, loving Lamb which was slain, Jesus, is victorious over the dragon, Satan, and the beast. This not only refers to the spiritual victory of love over hate, but also appears to refer to a future world empire and or leader, the beast, that follows and is possessed by Satan. The time for the historical fulfillment of many, if not most, of the prophecies in the Revelation may be in the near future. However, some have already been partially fulfilled, simply because the cornerstone of today's society is the same as that which has existed since the time of ancient Babylon. The forces which are leading to the fullness of the prophecy's fulfillment are around right now. It is just that today sees the culmination of many historical developments which have been working together to lead us toward a new world empire, 1 John 2 verse 18. This coming world empire is not an altogether new development. It is simply the culmination of all the human governments of history. In one of the most accurate and verified prophecies ever, Daniel foresees all the world empires from his time until the kingdom of heaven comes and destroys the final empire. Daniel 2 verse 44, Daniel 7 verse 18. Daniel interprets a dream about a statue, predicting the Persian, Greek and Roman empires. Daniel 2. Later on he sees 4 beasts which symbolize in turn the 4 empires: the Babylonian empire of his day, the Persian empire, the Greek empire and the Roman empire. Daniel 7. Daniel notes that the 4th beast is diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, and the main emphasis of the rest of the prophecies in the Revelation, as well as Daniel's, is about this beast. The Roman Empire, or, more accurately, a unique empire represented by the 10 toes, which rises from the ruins of the Roman Empire. It appeared that the Roman Empire fell a few hundred years after Christ, but it actually divided into East and West divisions that remain to this day, and which were actually predicted by Daniel. The 2 legs of the statue in Daniel's dream fit perfectly with the continuation of the Roman Empire as it co-opted and almost destroyed Christianity in 2 forms: the Byzantine Empire, which was the origin of the Russian and Greek Orthodox churches, and the Holy Roman Catholic Empire. The 2 major world powers today are direct descendants of these 2 empires. Although the communists have supposedly thrown off their feudal Byzantine heritage, the same spirit of tyranny remains, and although Protestant capitalism supposedly left Catholic feudalism behind, the same hoarding of wealth that was the shame of the Church is even more the definitive characteristic of the Western world. In the same way that the iron and clay in the feet of Daniel's statue would not mix, the present system of man is divided, yet still possesses the strength of the Roman Empire. Daniel 2 verse 43. But these divisions will be overcome in the final empire to emerge. The 4th beast has 10 horns, a characteristic that links this empire to the one spoken of in Revelation 17, and Revelation 12 verse 3, and Revelation 13 verse 1, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. An angel explains to John that these heads symbolize 7 world empires, of which 5 are fallen: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. One is Rome, and the other is yet to come. This last one appears to be a future world government, which gives rise to a world leader, who will be the most powerful earthly leader there has ever been. He will be totally against God, and he will gain his power directly from Satan. Revelation 13. Even though this final empire only appears to last for a few years right at the end of history, it is the ultimate empire, in that it embodies all of the worst, and perhaps the best as well, in all of the empires of human history. It certainly is the most significant one in prophecy. Revelation 17 goes on to say that this beast, that is the last world empire, is red, Revelation 17 verse 3, and that a prostitute called Babylon the Great sits on it. An angel tells John that the prostitute is a great city that reigns over the kings of the earth, Revelation 17 verse 18. Another angel goes on to explain that the main feature of this city is its wealth and importance as a place for trade, Revelation 18. An interpretation that fits well with modern-day events is that the beast is Russia, red equals communist, and the whore is the USA. Like a prostitute, America talks of love, represented by institutional Christianity, but it really only wants money. Today, the United States has political and economic dominance over the entire world, but according to prophecy, the beast, the Soviet Union, will one day eat her flesh and burn her with fire, Revelation 17 verse 16. Then the Soviet Union, working in union with other nations, which will give it power to rule the world, will go on to become the fulfillment of the rest of the end-time prophecies about the final, terrible beast. Many of the things mentioned in the Revelation were simply impossible until less than 100 years ago. Who could have considered, even 200 years ago, that it would be possible for men to destroy the earth? Revelation 11, verse 18. But today we have grown accustomed to the threat of annihilation hanging over our heads through the threat of nuclear war. John hears about an army of 200 million people, Revelation 9, verse 16. This has only really become possible since post-Mao China. Nuclear strikes now make passages of destruction by fire sound more plausible. Revelation 8, verse 7 to 11, Revelation 16, verse 8, Revelation 18, verse 8 to 10. With 90% of the scientists that have ever lived being alive today, ours is certainly an age of many people running to and fro and knowledge being increased. This is another sign of the end, according to Daniel 12, verse 4. Only with today's worldwide telecommunications has it been possible for this prophecy to be fulfilled. The people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies, referring to the two witnesses. Revelation 11, verse 9. There are some other interesting things occurring right now that could be signs that the time is coming closer. The number 666, Revelation 13, verses 16 to 18, appears as a fundamental code built into the universal product classification system, known as the barcode. This is a development of technology that is amenable to some sort of universal person classification system, and the cashless society based on a mark, perhaps some form of a barcode, without which one cannot buy or sell. The star which falls to earth and makes the waters bitter so that many men die is called wormwood, which is translated as Chernobyl in Ukrainian. Radiation poisoning of water fits this prophecy perfectly, although the level of death which actually occurred, at least so far, is nowhere near the level prophesied. Revelation 8, verses 10 to 11. These occurrences are not total fulfillments of the prophecies, but their similarities are perhaps indications of what is to come. A pattern is certainly coming together, and as the time grows closer, the fullness of the prophecies will be revealed more and more. The statistics of population growth, energy consumption, non-renewable resource consumption, species extinction, desert expansion, arms production, environmental destruction and pollution show an exponential growth towards inevitable disaster. In fact, the longer there is no worldwide crisis to fix the problem, like widespread famine, war, or plague to cause death to a large proportion of the world's population, the greater the crisis will be when it comes. It is impossible to physically maintain the present exponential growth of both greed in the developed world and population in the developing world. Of course, there are more than enough resources for double the present population's needs, but the scenario presented here assumes that the world's systems will not change their basic attitudes, and it is a reasonable hypothesis in the light of history. It is even more reasonable if we observe that there was only one government system that was ever slightly in line with God. That was the ancient Jews. Yet their claim to being God's kingdom was lost with their rejection of the higher revelation of God's kingdom through Jesus Christ. Galatians 2 verse 16 and Galatians 2 verses 28 to 29. Actually, there is much in prophecy to suggest that the Antichrist will, at least initially, claim to be the Messiah, coming to usher in the millennium of peace, with his government posing as the visible kingdom of heaven, bringing peace and prosperity, Daniel 8 verses 23 to 25, and deceiving people into believing that he is the Christ, Revelation 13 verse 11, Matthew 7 verse 15, and Matthew 24 verse 24. One of the most widespread themes of the increasingly popular and mainstream New Age movement is that disaster, Great Tribulation, can be averted if enough people change their consciousness to align with an emerging thought pattern which arose in the 60s. This new pattern, at first, appeared to be more in tune with the practical applications of the teachings of Jesus. It included such emphasis as simple living, a caring attitude, sharing, being against the system, and a lack of the hypocrisy that is so prevalent in the churches. However, as we go into the 90s, the New Age movement is becoming increasingly materialistic and increasingly aligned with the system. And with such an alignment, it is quickly gaining momentum and respectability. Indeed, because it doesn't even claim to be Christian, its potential excesses are far beyond that of the church, and its emphasis on hedonism, the occult, and spiritism leave the door wide open to acceptance of Satan himself as the new Messiah. Its philosophy is a perfect vehicle for the Antichrist, through which he can claim to fulfill the misplaced hopes of a lukewarm population who want, at any cost, to avoid suffering. Perhaps Daniel hints at this when he says, "By peace he shall destroy many." Daniel 8, verse 25. The doctrine of avoiding suffering is contrary to the message of Christianity. Indeed, it is a fairy tale. Yet this doctrine is almost universal, not only with the New Age movement, but also with pre-tribulation rapture theorists. One thing in the prophecies is sure: everyone will suffer. The fundamental question is whether we shall suffer for obeying God or for disobeying God. If we choose to break ourselves on the rock of the teachings of Jesus, we pay now, and we suffer persecution for our decision. But even in this life, we will have spiritual comfort and deep satisfaction from being true to our conscience, and in the future we will have infinite eternal reward. God promises to correct us, often painfully, as an expression of his love. Revelation 3 verse 19, Hebrews 12 verses 4 to 11. If we choose to avoid suffering in the short term, we will pay much more later, and there will be no reward. In this case, the best we can hope for is a speedy annihilation, and we will probably suffer the unbearably torturous wrath of God with total despair and hopelessness. It ends with us being crushed to dust by the rock. Luke 20 verse 18, Revelation 14 verse 9 to 11, and Revelation 16. The doctrine of suffering and enduring is central to Christianity. Not only did Jesus provide the ultimate example of dying for love and God, but we are clearly taught to do the same. There is a fire that is coming. For the unbelieving, it is a fire of destruction. Matthew 13 verses 49 to 50, Revelation 16 verse 8. For the obedient, it is a fire of purification. Mark 9 verse 49. To the Christians who endure to the end, in obedience to God, and who overcome, belong rewards that include eternal life, salvation, sitting on the throne with Jesus, being God's children, and other things that are hard to understand at present, probably because the dimension of heaven is quite different from what we are used to on earth. Revelation 2 verse 26, and Revelation 3 verse 5, verse 12, and verse 21. The Revelation talks of a great persecution of Christians by the Antichrist. Revelation 12 verse 13 and 17. At this time it will seem that the Antichrist has totally destroyed the Christians. Daniel 7 verse 21 and verse 25, and Revelation 13 verse 7. Many who were thought to be true Christian leaders will lose their faith. Daniel 11 verse 35. But this is only so that Christians will be truly tested, to see if their ultimate faith was in God. Revelation 13 verse 10, or whether it was in their religious leaders. The testing will also be to see if we will truly obey, endure, and overcome, no matter what. It is hard to say for sure exactly how difficult these times will be. It seems that God will leave it up to our free will whether or not we shall disobey him. The Bible says that he will not give us testing beyond which we can endure. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13. However, what we think is unendurable is not always what God thinks we are capable of enduring. A central passage of the Revelation talks about a universal marking system without which no man might buy or sell. Revelation 13 verse 17. Those who accept this mark shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and be tormented with fire and brimstone. Revelation 14 verse 10. God's people are described as those who had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name. Revelation 15 verse 2. The number of the beast is 666. Revelation 13 verse 18. And this number is an important clue to understanding the way which God uses to separate his children from the devil's. There is only one other place in the Bible where the number 666 appears. It is in the number of talents of gold that Solomon received in a year, 1 Kings 10, verse 14. The connection between the two verses is that they are both referring to a means of exchange, or money, the love of which is the root of all evil, 1 Timothy 6, verse 10. Money is a subject that Jesus continually spoke about. It is the basis of all the empires of man, and the antithesis of faith in God, Matthew 6, verse 24. We're urged not to worry about any of our material needs, Matthew 6, verses 25 to 31, and to seek above all what God wants, Matthew 6, verse 33. This is the solution to the puzzle of the book of Revelation, for it is by living by faith in God that we come out of Babylon, Revelation 18, verse 4, and it is by living by faith in God that we are able to refuse the mark of the beast. Most people will not believe that they can live without the mark, just as today most people do not believe they can live without money. If we live without owning possessions, Luke 12 verse 33 and Luke 14 verse 33, and if we trust in God for our food and clothes, in accordance with Christ's teaching, it will be a lot easier to obey the command to instantly run away, not even stopping to gather anything up in the day when the Son of Man is revealed, Luke 17 verses 31 to 36. The book of Revelation talks of the true church, the woman fleeing to a prepared place in the wilderness for the time of the tribulation, Revelation 12 verse 6, by means of the wings of an eagle, Revelation 12 verse 14. Jesus mentions cryptically in Luke's passage about fleeing that wheresoever the body is, there will the eagles be gathered together, Luke 17 verse 37. This seems to be a reference to the true church being taken to the wilderness and protected, at least to some extent. Perhaps the eagles are some form of air transport that will bring scattered Christians together away from the system. Time will tell. The concepts of not working for money, working for love, and trusting God all work together to form a theme that not only solves the puzzle of the revelation, but that is a recurring theme throughout the whole Bible. The wilderness faith of the Christians in the tribulation is paralleled by the experience of the Jews in the Exodus from the Egyptian Empire, Exodus 12 and onwards, where they were fed manna which fell from heaven for 40 years. In the very beginning of the Bible was the curse that God put upon disobedient Adam and Eve. Most of the curse involved having to work in the dust for food, agriculture, instead of eating freely from the tree of life. But Jesus has set us free from the curse of working for food, Galatians 3 verse 13. He even commands us not to do so, John 6 verse 27. After the events of the tribulation, the faithful people who did good works, Matthew 25 verses 31 to 46, and Revelation 20 verses 12 to 13, receive the tree of life back again, with the curse totally lifted, Revelation 22 verse 2 to 3. The book of Revelation is part of the overall message of the Bible, and it has great relevance to how we should live our lives right now, as well as having relevance in the times of the end. Even if the time of the fulfillment of the prophecies was not about to come, it would still be relevant, because the book is really the revelation of Jesus Christ, and it is specifically for those who obey Jesus Christ. Revelation 1 verse 1 and Revelation 22 verse 6. As John says, the time is at hand, Revelation 1 verse 3. There is teaching in this book which we are urged to keep, Revelation 1 verse 3 and Revelation 22 verse 7. Obedience to the teachings of Jesus is a major key to understanding this book, especially, but not exclusively, in the end times. It seems that the rewards are for all of God's people throughout history. The price is all that we have, Luke 14 verse 33, but the reward is more than we can possibly imagine, Matthew 19 verses 27 to 30, and Revelation 21 verse 7. And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me, to give every man according as his work shall be. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life. Revelation 22 verses 12 to 14. He that overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. Revelation 21 verse 7. The Spirit of Prophecy. I fell at his feet to worship him, and he said unto me, See ye do it not. I am thy fellow servant, and of thy brethren that have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Revelation 19 verse 10. The majority of sermons on the above passage of Scripture usually miss something. What the various preachers commonly do is use Jesus to support their interest in Bible prophecy. They take the phrase, the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy, and use it more or less to say, if you want to keep Jesus happy, study prophecy. And their studies of prophecy appear to be leading nowhere. Lots of dates and isolated events, but no consistent or overriding message. But of course, this is not what prophecy is all about, and it is not what the passage is saying. If we reverse it a bit, the message becomes clearer. The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus. In other words, the real reason for all prophecy is to lead people to a greater appreciation and understanding of Jesus. This verse from near the end of the Revelation is supported by the opening verse of the Revelation as well, which says that it is a revelation of Jesus Christ. Revelation 1 verse 1. Not a revelation of when the world is going to end. Not a revelation of which church is the right church. Not a revelation of what is going to appear in tomorrow's newspaper. Although there may be snippets of all of these in there as well. But primarily, it is a revelation of Jesus Christ, or as the verse above says, it is a revelation of the testimony of Jesus. Now compare this with the most powerful testimony that the institutional church has ever produced with regard to Bible prophecy, the Left Behind series, which have been sold by the tens of millions around the world. The book rattles on and on and on, with high-tech adventures and romances, but precious little information about either Bible prophecy or about the testimony of Jesus. Still, if you are rich enough to be able to afford all of the books, selling for as much as $45 apiece, and if you could melt down all of the biblical teaching that is contained in them, you might come up with one slim volume of information, which would include at least 20 identical sermons about Jesus dying for your sins and your need to accept him as your saviour. But is this the testimony of Jesus? It is true as far as it goes. Yes, Jesus did die for the sins of the world. But what is his testimony? What did he say? You will not find it in any of those 10 books. The Bible tells us to desire the sincere milk of the word, that you may grow thereby. 1 Peter 2 verse 2. But how many people want to dig deeply enough to uncover the real truth behind Scripture? It is easier to settle for the same insipid shallowness week after week and year after year, perhaps with a few thrills thrown in from time to time, as happens with the fiction thrillers in the Left Behind series, than to face up to the true spirit of what the Bible is saying. And we hasten to point out that the real truth is not some far-out esoteric revelation either. It is right there in clear black and white, when we are willing to simply open our eyes and see it. What is the testimony of Jesus, and how does it relate to Bible prophecy? Few people would argue with the fact that the testimony of Jesus is a testimony of love. He said that the greatest commandment is to love God with all of our heart and to love our neighbours as we love ourselves. He told his followers to turn the other cheek and to love their enemies. Then he practiced what he preached, when he suffered a cruel execution at the hands of his enemies, without once hitting back. And how does that testimony come out of Bible prophecy? The Revelation teaches that there are any number of man-made empires in the world, all of which live by the sword. One by one they are toppled by bigger and stronger military powers, but each one becomes worse than the one before. Yet the Revelation also teaches that the Lamb that was slain will conquer them all through a radically different approach. This approach is symbolized by a cross, and not by a sword or a gun. His kingdom is a kingdom of love, a kingdom without the carnal weapons of the world. It does not take a seminary student to see that this powerful lesson is broadcast from beginning to end, both in the Revelation and in the Gospels. But where is it in the Left Behind series? And where is it in the preaching of others who claim to be experts in Bible prophecy? Experts they may be in the eyes of the world, or at least in the eyes of their individual denominations, but they are imbeciles when it comes to discerning the real spirit of prophecy, which is the testimony of Jesus. The Revelation also deals with the mark of the beast, without which people will not be able to buy or sell. This seems eminently consistent with the idea that the love of money is the root of all evil, and that God wants people who will serve him in preference to mammon. That message appears on almost every page of the Gospels, but that, too, is not being preached in the churches today. We live in a world that is almost universally concerned with power and wealth, at the same time that much of that world claims to be following the one who taught that his kingdom will be built on humility and poverty. Those who seek the former end up resorting to war. Their faith in money leads them to kill and plunder. Those who put their faith in Jesus and in the kingdom that he came to build seek to show love to all who will receive it. This is the spirit of prophecy. This is the testimony of Jesus. Without it, all of our religious talk and activity is worthless. Thy kingdom come. As people with a serious concern for the welfare of this planet, the return of Christ offers us hope. Earth at the moment has a jinx on it. The best laws, best political systems, and best technology still go haywire, and the end result is greater suffering, increased corruption, and bigger and better wars. As we understand it, the creator of this planet has told us, through Jesus Christ, how the perfect government should operate. He calls on us to practice these principles in our own lives, but assures us that the same world that killed Jesus for his beliefs will eventually kill us. In other words, we have been given all the necessary theory, but not the means to put it into practice on a large scale. This dilemma is part of an ingenious recruiting system for the leaders of the new world. Only those who believe in honesty, faith, and love, enough to die for those beliefs, will be suitable leaders in the new world order. Political expediency, economic pragmatism, and moral compromise are the stuff from which successful systems are made, but they are also the seeds from which their corruption grows. So our coming leader is seeking an army of people who will not cheat on fundamental principles for the sake of political success. The second coming of Christ means, among other things, the lifting of the jinx, the turning of some cosmic switch, which will finally let good triumph over evil on a grand and everlasting scale. As we understand it, Jesus will, after his return, live on and reign over earth. He will appoint some of us as rulers over specific geographical areas. The people we lead will not be angels. They will be ordinary people with ordinary problems. It will be our job to teach them how to work together in harmony for the good of all mankind, and we will succeed. We will literally create heaven on earth. But we will only succeed because our leader has the ability to stop the flow of outside evil influences, that is, the devil. Our task as world leaders will be difficult, but it will no longer be a losing battle. We leaders will have the added advantage that we will never die. The entire human race has an instinctive longing for a world where good triumphs over evil. But plan after plan for the salvation of the human race has resulted in failure. Each new system offers promises of the longed-for utopia. Some put their hopes in new systems, some give up hope altogether, but we look for the return of the one we call the Son of God, who alone can rule the world in fairness to all. In the meantime, we strive to practice daily the principles that he taught. This, and the persecution that accompanies it, is our training for the day when our leader returns to establish God's kingdom on earth. Signs of the times. War and peace. Wars are the most common proof given that the end of the world is near, yet they are mentioned specifically by Christ as proof that the end has not come. You will hear of wars and rumours of wars. Do not let this trouble you, for all these things must happen, but the end is not yet. Matthew 24, verse 6. An increase in the number, intensity, and rumours media coverage of wars does, however, lead to an international craving for a single world government to end all wars. Jesus called an increase of wars and natural disasters the beginning of sorrows. Matthew 24, verse 8. The world government that arises in response to all these disasters will be a truer sign that the end is near. Its trademark will be a false peace, or time of worldwide prosperity. The Hebrew prophet Daniel says of the final world ruler, he will come in peacefully and obtain power through flattery. Daniel 8, verse 21. And through peace or prosperity, he will destroy many. Daniel 8, verse 25. Quakes, famines, and plagues. Another part of the beginning of sorrows will be natural disasters. Two of these, earthquakes and famines, have dramatically increased in this century, though an even more dramatic increase may be yet to come. The third disaster, plagues, may be just beginning, and AIDS may be only a part of it. These disasters are likely to lead to a call for a global organization to combat them. Denominationalism. A proliferation of so-called Christian denominations was seen by Jesus as another part of the beginning of sorrows, which may also require a strong central government to control it. Matthew 24, verse 5. The ecumenical movement is an attempt to reverse the trend toward more and more religious leaders claiming authority or an anointing from God. Christ simply means anointed one. A little diversity has turned into a lot of confusion, and churches everywhere are losing credibility because of their inability to get along with one another. Unfortunately, the remedy may prove worse than the disease. A single, monolithic religious structure, without a change in the hearts of the individuals within it, will only lead to atrocities against non-conformists, as always happens with religious/political dictatorships. In all attempts toward religious union, not one union has been made with the teachings of Jesus as the basis for determining what to accept and what to reject. The builders have left out the cornerstone, and what they are building will only amount to a false unity and a diabolical bride for the coming world dictator. The Fall of America. Armageddon, Revelation 16 verse 16 and Revelation 19 verses 19 to 21, is a battle in which Russia and the forces of world communism are destroyed. Tubal and Meshech in the Ezekiel 39 account have been translated by some as Tobolsk and Moscow. The present, apparent collapse of communism suggests Armageddon is over and it is time for the reign of Christ. But communism, or the beast that will rule the world, has most likely only received a deadly wound from which it will soon recover. Revelation 13 verses 3 to 12. Two symbolic powers exist in the last days: an atheistic anti-Christian beast which blasphemes God, and a prostitute which dominates world trade. The prostitute sits on the beast, Revelation 17 verses 3 to 5, as America is doing with communism. But with the help of 10 other kings, the beast turns on the prostitute and destroys her with fire, Revelation 17 verses 16 to 17. The businessmen and shipping companies of the world will mourn the fall of capitalism in 1 hour, Revelation 18. World communism. The fall of America clears the way for a popular world government. Its leader will control a 10-nation council from which he receives his authority to govern, Daniel 7 verse 24. A new economic policy will vastly increase production, resulting in worldwide prosperity. But the government will refuse to recognize God, and the world ruler will turn against all who have faith in God, Daniel 8 verses 24 to 25. Communism is the ultimate counterfeit of the kingdom of God, Acts 2 verses 44 to 45. Though we support its ideals, we oppose its efforts to eliminate God. The use of religion by the rich and powerful to keep people in line is certainly wrong, but this is not what communism objects to. For communists too have used the institutional church as a tool of the state. The false superchurch. Left-wing church leaders who lack courage to live and preach voluntary Christian communism are becoming more sympathetic to and used by world communism to bring about change. But there is no such thing as a just war if it is led by unjust people. Only God himself is entitled to destroy life, and that is why human governments always seek the support of churches to justify their wars. The New World Order will be no exception. It seems the coming ruler will bring about universal religious harmony by rebuilding Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, thus allowing Jews to resume offering animal sacrifices. Plans have been put forward for a temple which would include an area for Jews, one for Muslims and one for Christians. Passages in Daniel indicate that it will take just over 7 months to rebuild this temple, and that from its completion there will be less than 6.5 years left until Jesus returns. Daniel 9 verse 27, Daniel 8 verses 13 to 14. Note, the term week in the King James Bible is translated as 7 years in most other translations. The Great Tribulation. The period of religious tolerance and harmony under the one world government will be short-lived. The Revelation depicts a period of great trouble, heralded by 7 trumpets, Revelation chapter 8 and chapter 9. Jesus called it the Great Tribulation, and he said he would return immediately after it, Matthew 24 verses 16 to 17. Paul said Jesus would return at the sound of the 7th trumpet, 1 Corinthians 15 verses 51 to 53, and 1 Thessalonians 4 verses 16 to 17. The first 6 trumpets describe a global catastrophe which burns a third of the ships and kills a third of the animal life in the oceans. It tells of a star hitting the earth, the sky being darkened, and great hailstorms over much of the earth. Hailstorms and darkness are consistent with widespread fires, filling the sky with smoke and repeatedly forcing condensation far up into the atmosphere, where it would freeze and refreeze into giant hailstones. It is possible that the star, a giant meteor or deadly satellite, will be what causes the fires and sea deaths, maybe from tidal waves and radioactivity as well. These disasters trigger off a global persecution of Christians by the world dictator, who will take over the temple in Jerusalem and cause the Jewish sacrifices to cease. Matthew 24, verses 15 to 22, Daniel 11, verse 31, and Daniel 12, verse 11. It may be that the dictator will blame Christians for the disasters. It will not be hard to convince the world that we did it, if we have been predicting for years that it would happen. There will be great confusion amongst the masses of churchgoers who have been told that they would never have to go through this period. 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 3 to 4, 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 to 4. Many will be killed. Daniel 7, verses 21 to 25. Because they have not learned to hear God's voice above the clamour of religion. Matthew 24, verses 24 to 28. Idealists of many persuasions will look to Christians for leadership, as they too flee from the colossal deception of the government in which they had put their trust. Daniel 11, verses 32 to 35. Many of us will die during this period, but our witness will go into all the world. Revelation 6, verse 11, and Revelation 7, verse 14. The Church in the Wilderness. When the sacrifices cease, Christians around the world, referred to in the Revelation as the bride of Christ, will be instructed by God to flee to secret hideouts which God has prepared for us. If necessary, he will give us supernatural assistance to reach our place of refuge. Revelation 12, verse 6, and Revelation 12, verses 12 to 14, where we will survive, at least some of us, 3.5 years until Jesus returns. Revelation 12 tells of a cosmic struggle between good and evil. The battle starts with the Virgin Mary giving birth to Jesus as the devil tries to destroy her son. Revelation 12 verses 1 to 4, as Herod did in Matthew 2. Jesus eventually ascends to heaven where he reigns in triumph over the devil. Revelation 12 verses 5 to 12. When the devil knows there is little time left before Jesus returns, he begins an all-out war on the woman and her descendants. Revelation 12, verse 13 and verse 17. Mary is symbolic of the true church, or all true followers of Jesus. Luke 8, verse 21. The sudden escape to the wilderness is described in Luke 17, verses 28 to 37, where Jesus commands us not to delay when he tells us to move. Luke 17, verse 31. It seems that during this 3.5-year period, immediately prior to the return of Jesus, and for 3.5 years immediately prior to that, the true church is at least a visible organization. Daniel 9, verse 27. God's Spirit organizes all truly sincere people in the world into 12 tribes of 12,000 people each, possibly in 12 different locations around the globe. Revelation 7, verses 4 to 8. The 12 tribes don't just survive during these final terrifying years. Instead, they actively recruit thousands, if not millions, of other believers, many of whom will be executed for their faith. Revelation 7, verses 9 to 14, Daniel 7, verse 21 and 25, and Daniel 11, verses 31 to 35. There is no organization you can join that can guarantee you will be part of this elite army. You can only prepare yourself by actively seeking the truth every day, and by learning to instantly obey anything God directs you to do. The Mark of the Beast. Revelation 13, verses 15 to 18, says that all the world will be linked to a system which does not allow people to buy or sell without showing a mark that they have either in their right hand or in their forehead. More and more economists are predicting exactly the same thing in the form of an implanted silicone chip, which will identify every individual on Earth. The Bible gives solemn warning against ever accepting this mark, Revelation 14, verses 9 to 12. It may be that the only way anyone who does accept it can be saved will be to take passages like Matthew 18 verse 8 literally. The Mark of the Beast. The last book of the Bible is called the Revelation by Protestants and the Apocalypse by Catholics. It is a poetic description of the battle between good and evil, using numerous symbols and creatures to illustrate its message. Parts of the book deal specifically with the period near the end of history, when Jesus Christ is supposed to return to earth and fight a great battle with evil, commonly known as the Battle of Armageddon. Over the centuries, millions of people have been intrigued by the Revelation, particularly as they have tried to use it to decipher exact dates for when these events will take place. Whole denominations have been formed on the basis of a particular interpretation, most notably Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, and Christadelphians. Such denominations have generally been regarded as cults, outside the mainstream of Christianity, and their predictions have almost all proven to be incorrect. As a consequence, the apocalypse itself has fallen into disrepute. Some priests and ministers openly admonish their congregations not to even read it. Amongst Protestants, doctrines about health and prosperity have replaced talk about the world ending or Jesus literally returning to earth. On the whole, the institutional church is heading into the 21st century with more concern about the here and now of religious experience than with promises of divine intervention, which have been almost 2,000 years in coming. Yet interest in the revelation continues, sometimes in the strangest places. Passages which once required faith in a particular theologian's interpretation to be of interest now only require a little knowledge of world events, particularly in the area of computer technology. The Omen trilogy, released in the late 1980s, spawned a number of other films dealing with the subject of a coming world ruler who would be the son of Satan, in much the same way as Jesus Christ is the Son of God. In this decade, rock groups like Iron Maiden have had such hits as The Number of the Beast. The title refers to the number 666, or the mark of this world ruler, mentioned in the 13th chapter of the Revelation, and Stephen King regularly plays with apocalyptic themes in such books as The Stand. Like the cults that preceded them, the new gurus of the Revelation continue to exploit fear and to promote superstition. Real answers to the questions that they raise continue to be scarce or non-existent. Many passages in the Apocalypse require comparisons with similar passages in the writings of the Hebrew prophet Daniel before they can be understood. An exception is the one relating to the mark mentioned above. The Revelation talks of a beast being given authority over every tribe, nation, language, and race. All people living on earth will worship it, except those whose names were written before the creation of the world in the book of the living. Revelation 13, verses 7 to 8, today's English version. The passage goes on to say, "The beast forced all the people, small and great, rich and poor, slave and free, to have a mark placed on their right hands or on their foreheads. No one could buy or sell unless he had this mark, that is, the beast's name or the number that stands for the name. This calls for wisdom. Whoever is intelligent can work out the meaning of the number of the beast, because the number stands for a man's name. Its number is 666. Revelation 13, verses 16 to 18, today's English version. During the Protestant Reformation, it became popular to refer to the Pope as the Beast, or Antichrist. The official Latin title for the Pope, Vicarius Filii Dei, which means in the place of God, contains a number of letters which are also used as Roman numerals, V, I, C, L, and D. If these are all added up, they total 666. In recent years, people have used far more contrived systems for naming any number of world leaders as the Antichrist. Someone devised a system for ascribing numerical values to every letter of the English alphabet, and came up with a sum of 666 for Henry Kissinger's name. An even more contrived system was used to make Mikhail Gorbachev the Beast, using the Russian alphabet. Ronald Wilson Reagan was called the Beast just because his first, last, and middle names all had 6 letters in them. But while attempts to name the Antichrist using the dreaded number 666 have not proven convincing, In recent years, attention has turned to the predicted use of the number 666. The Expositor's Bible commentary, published by Zondervan Publishing House, dismisses attempts to name the Antichrist and emphasizes that the number 666 relates to socio-economic control in general and is somehow connected with idolatry and blasphemy. Working on this approach, a number of people have been led to question the growing use of the number 666 in relation to banks and computers. Press reports relating to smart cards and a coming cashless economy often sound like they were taken directly from the Revelation. Through the use of a tiny microchip, the size of a grain of rice, on smart cards issued to every citizen on Earth, and a huge central computer base, every business transaction on Earth could be monitored and recorded. No one would be able to buy or sell without the microchip. And when people have been sufficiently educated in the use of smart cards, it would only be a short step to remove the microchip from the smart card and implant it under the skin of the right hand, or on the forehead if the recipient is missing a right hand. The implant could be achieved painlessly and invisibly, and it would eliminate the problems of lost or stolen credit cards. In Australia, two Christians walked into a branch of the ANZ Bank with barcodes emblazoned on their bald heads, and just their presence so infuriated bank staff that police were called and the men were physically removed from the premises. When they returned a short while later, they were arrested and charged with trespassing. Out on the street, other bald accomplices were distributing a short leaflet, warning people against moves towards such an economy. Here is what it said. Antichrist, the diabolical being opposed to the true Messiah. The end of the world will be heralded by his last desperate attempt to bring about the victory of the powers of evil, but he will be finally vanquished by Christ at the second coming. There was a strong belief in the Middle Ages that the Antichrist would arise in Rome. This led to the mystic Joachim of Fior, circa 1130 to 1201, to equate him with the Pope. Page 29, Dictionary of Christian Law and Legend, J.C.J. Metford, Thames and Hudson, 1983. Beast of the Apocalypse, one of two beasts which symbolize the arch-enemies of the early Christians. This one bears the number 666, which has given rise to many interpretations. Antichrist, the prince of Christ's enemies. Many see him in the strange beasts of Revelation, sometimes thought to represent Rome, and the man of sin of 2 Thessalonians 2 verses 3 to 10, who will appear after a great apostasy before the day of the Lord, and sit in God's sanctuary claiming to be God. Others have connected Antichrist not with a person, but with an evil principle. Yet others have seen in Antichrist a reference to Caligula, the attempt of Caligula to set up his statue in the temple at Jerusalem, and the deification of the emperor and emperor worship, suggested strongly that Antichrist would come from imperial Rome. Cyril of Jerusalem states that he will be a magician who will take control of the Roman Empire, claim to be Christ, deceive the Jews by pretending to be the son of David and rebuilding the temple, and who, after persecuting the Christians, will be slain at the second advent by the Son of God. Since the Reformation, the identification of the Pope with Antichrist has been frequently made, especially in the less educated circles of Protestantism. Page 63 to 64 of the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church, 2nd edition, Oxford University Press, 1978. The Expositor's Bible Commentary, Volume 12, page 533, Zondervan Publishing House, 1984, on Revelation 13:18 says, the Jews used Hebrew alphabetical numbers to indicate concealed names and mysterious connections with other words of the same numerical value. Thus, most commentators have understood John's words, let him calculate the number, his number is 666, to be an invitation to the reader to discover the identity of the beast. Irenaeus, 2nd century, believed the name would be secret till the time of the beast's future appearance in the world. In Revelation 15 verse 2, the victors have triumphed over the number of his name, which suggests a symbolic significance connected with idolatry and blasphemy, rather than victory over a mere puzzle solution of correctly identifying someone's name. A growing number of individuals and groups around the world are predicting that the present trend toward the cashless society is an evil conspiracy, aimed at controlling the entire human race. Their explanations, motivations, and solutions vary considerably. But they all agree that what we see happening in the banking world today was predicted in the 13th chapter of the Revelation, the last book of the Bible, nearly 2,000 years ago, and that it is going to lead to disaster. On the whole, these groups represent the lunatic fringe of Christianity. They include groups that are predicting dates for the second coming of Christ, as well as groups that are stockpiling weapons in anticipation of a global Holocaust. But their basic message, that the cashless society and one-world government were predicted in the Bible, is gaining acceptance in a wider cross-section of both the church and the secular world. Many individuals are recognizing that there is a ring of truth in it, even if they do not subscribe to the other beliefs of the groups concerned. So what exactly is the prophecy? It is found in the Revelation, chapter 13, verses 16 to 18. The context of the prophecy is that an alliance of nations will eventually rule the world. One leader will gain control of that body. He will have widespread support, and his policies will result in peace and prosperity for much of the human race. He will succeed in getting the whole world to take a mark in their right hand or on their forehead, without which they will not be able to buy or sell. When he has total control of the world economy, he will elevate himself to the status of a god, and he will begin a massive slaughter of anyone who refuses to worship him. More people will be killed in this purge than at any previous time in Earth's history. Matthew 24, verses 21 to 22. This ruler is called the Beast. He is no mere human. He is the son of the devil in much the same way that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. The Bible warns that anyone who takes the mark of the beast will receive the full strength of God's wrath. Revelation 14, verses 9 to 11. It is tempting when writing about the mark of the beast to make predictions with regard to the present worldwide move towards the cashless society. There is almost certainly a connection between the two. But we're not really prophesying when we do that, so much as we are interpreting prophecy in the light of the daily newspaper. And when we make a mistake or exaggerate or assume things are going to move along more rapidly than they actually do, it all gets used against us, and the result is that the original prophecy loses credibility. If a prophecy is genuine, it should become overwhelmingly clear as it actually comes to pass. Prior to that time, there may be a great many clues or signs of the times, but none of these clues is conclusive in itself. The computer barcode, for example, which now appears on almost everything you buy at the shop, features 3 pairs of lines, at each end and in the middle, which are slightly longer than the other lines. These 3 pairs of lines are the same on all products which use that particular system, and the most popular system uses the line symbols for the number 6 in each of these 3 places, giving rise to the suggestion that this is the notorious 666 mentioned in Revelation 13, verse 18, as the number of the beast. But if the 666 pattern was dropped from the barcode system, it would not make the prophecy false. It would only make that interpretation incorrect. The original bank card symbol was 3 sixes, 1 red, 1 orange, and 1 yellow, inside each other, but that has given way to other cards which do not appear to use 6s. Another Christian suffered embarrassment when he printed an article based on a report in the March 1984 Australian Bank Employees News Bulletin, which said that an experiment had begun in Sweden involving special marks on the hand or forehead of 6,000 people. The report said that the mark would be used for all business transactions made by those people. When he contacted the Bank Employers Union about it after his article came out, he was told that the article in their newsletter had been an April Fool's joke. Yet the nagging question under all of this is why the banks, or the bank employees, feel it is necessary to pull such pranks, or to keep using the forbidden number 666. Is it all part of a plan to mix ridicule with schemes to test the public's reaction to such an idea? What sounded like a joke in 1984 is being treated much more seriously by the banks, the media, and the public now. Yet those who predicted it are still being depicted as deluded fanatics with wild imaginations. This does not seem fair. The world has made a big fuss over prophecies of people like Nostradamus and Jean Dixon, who have been wrong in their predictions far more often than they have been correct. But here is a very clear and objective prophecy which has been understood and anticipated for almost 2,000 years. It is very close to coming true in our own lifetime. It carries with it some powerful warnings for the entire human race. So why shouldn't we be doing some serious talking about what it could mean for us as a race and as individuals if we overlook the warnings associated with the prophecy? Is that too much to ask? Don't take the mark. In the last book of the Bible is one of the most astounding prophecies of all time. It says a world leader will arise in the last days who will try to get everyone on earth to accept a mark in their right hand or in their forehead, without which they will not be able to buy or sell anything. See Revelation 13, verses 16 to 17. And through this mark, he will be able to control the whole world. This prophecy was made nearly 2,000 years ago, before the days of paper currency, checks, credit cards, or microchips. It was unthinkable that any world leader could control the entire population of the world to that extent. And as the world's population has grown many times over since then, it has sounded progressively more impossible over the years, until now. We have the technology. Computer technology now makes it possible for people to do their shopping with a plastic card that instantly subtracts funds from their bank accounts and deposits them into the accounts of the people they buy from. A tiny microchip the size of a grain of rice on these smart cards can record every transaction, as well as holding a huge file of information on the person making the transaction, including medical history, police records, address, birth date, etc. The technology is also available to implant the microchip under the skin on each person's hand, thus eliminating the possibility that the card could be lost or stolen. The arguments in favour of implementing such technology are overwhelming. It would do everything from wiping out the drug trade, which always deals in cash, to simplifying banking. But the proponents of microchip implants keep running into opposition from people who are aware of the prophecy referred to at the start of this article. Opposition is highest in those countries where interest in Bible prophecy is highest, most notably in the United States. The context of the prophecy is that an alliance of nations will eventually rule the world, and one world leader will gain control of that body. This leader will have widespread support, and his policies will result in peace and prosperity for much of the world. But then he will elevate himself to the position of a god, and he will begin a massive slaughter of anyone who refuses to worship him. More people will be killed in this purge than at any previous time in Earth's history. See Matthew 24, verses 21 to 22. No wonder that people who have studied this prophecy are suspicious of the approaching cashless economy. But whether they are suspicious or not, the mark will come, and so will the world leader. It has been foretold, and the best that we can do is to stall its implementation. But there is an even more surprising prediction, and that is a great many of the very people who are warning the world about this dictator will one day accept the mark themselves. This will be explained more later, but first, although there are minor disagreements about end-time prophecies, there is a great deal of agreement with regard to the mark. After all, it's practically happening in front of our eyes. Banks persistently push people into using cards, whether lobbying for ID cards, offering incentives to switch to plastic, or supporting the latest card fad, e.g. flybys. They have the technology to bring in the mark right now, but so far they've not been able to get the general public to accept it. Outsmarting God. But what is most concerning are the knee-jerk reactions that so many people have to this and related prophecies. Through bullets. Prophecies are not given so that the initiated can use them to outsmart God. The US militia movement, which has been linked with the Oklahoma City bombing and the Waco, Texas branch Davidian cult, has sprung from attempts by Americans to arm themselves against the coming Antichrist, another name for the coming world leader. They have made the typical American blunder of thinking that weapons can buy them peace and security. Doomsday cults of all sorts have been given a bad name because of assumptions by some that they can fight violence with violence. No amount of weaponry will stop the Antichrist. Through bunkers. But not all who believe a world dictator is coming have turned to violence. Many more have turned to refuges. They stockpile supplies, buy land in the wilderness, learn survival techniques, plan escape routes, build fallout shelters, and just generally dig in with the aim of toughing it out during the persecution of people who do not take the mark, or in some other way conform with the coming one world government. Obviously, this is much safer than the militaristic approach, but it still misses the point of what the Revelation passage is trying to tell us. In itself, this approach is primarily defensive, and as such, is selfish. It places one's hope in material provision, the more the better, rather than in a loving God. And through Billy Graham. On the other extreme is the ask Jesus into your heart approach. These people do nothing practical. They get ready to die, but they do little or nothing about changing their present lifestyle. You don't need Bible prophecy to tell you that it is important to get right with God before you die. But if the prophecies are going to be fulfilled in the near future, then there must be something practical that we should be doing to prepare for them now. Listen to the Lamb. The answer lies in a broader understanding of prophecy. The full name of the last book of the Bible is the Revelation of Jesus Christ, and the opening verses tell us that it is a revelation given specifically to the servants of Jesus Christ. If you are not ready to serve, that is, obey Jesus, you'll never find solutions to problems predicted in the Revelation. The Revelation features a lamb and a beast. The beast, the final world dictator, appears to have total power over the inhabitants of the earth. But the Lamb, Jesus, conquers the beast in the end. Unless people are motivated to study and obey the teachings of the Lamb, they will never be able to escape the mark of the beast. The passage about the mark goes on to say that it is somehow related to the name of the beast, or the number of his name, which is 666. Computer barcodes include 3 identical pairs of lines at the left, right, and center of the lines representing the number of the product you are buying. These 3 pairs of lines are slightly longer than the others, and in the most widely used coding system, they are the 2 lines that represent the number 6. 3 sixes keep popping up each stage of the move towards a cashless society. Bank cards featured 3 sixes inside of each other, 1 red, 1 orange, and 1 yellow, which supposedly represented the letter B. The key card turned a 6 on its side and said it was a key. See Revelation 13, verses 16 to 18. Wiser than Solomon? If we turn to the Bible to unravel the mystery of the number, looking for the number 666 elsewhere in the Bible, we can find it in 1 Kings 10, verse 14, where it says, "The amount of gold that came to King Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents, about 25 tons. The Lamb, Jesus, referred to the events of this same chapter twice in his teachings. Once when he said his teachings were greater than Solomon's wisdom, and yet the Queen of Sheba came to hear Solomon's wisdom, giving him all this gold in appreciation. See Matthew 12, verse 42. And once when he said that all of Solomon's wealth could not compare with what God could provide for those who would stop working for money and start working for God. See Matthew 6, verses 24 to 30. Jesus obviously expected people to listen to him in preference to Solomon. The prostitute and the bride. 2 other characters in the Revelation are a prostitute, called Babylon, see Revelation 17, verses 1 to 5, and the bride, called Jerusalem, see Revelation 21, verses 1 to 10. In the Gospels, Jesus called this bride the kingdom from heaven, and he taught that God would provide the basic needs of anyone whose first goal in life was to promote this kingdom. See Matthew 6, verses 31 to 33. Babylon, as such, is not mentioned in the Gospels. Instead, Jesus says we have a choice between working for God or working for money. See Matthew 6, verse 24. He says to give God what belongs to God and give Caesar what belongs to Caesar. See Matthew 22, verses 19 to 21. And suggests that money is all that Caesar has been able to create, whereas real wealth comes from his Father. He says that God's children owe the Caesars of the world nothing. See Matthew 17, verses 24 to 26. The greatest achievement of the Babylonian Empire was the invention of money. Throughout the centuries, the spirit of Babylon has developed new ways to make it easier for the world's Solomons to move their tons of gold around. The electronic mark, spoken of in the Revelation, is just a consummation of it all. So what do we do? The response to the warnings of the Revelation are quite simple. We start obeying Jesus by learning to live by faith right now, working for God rather than working for money. St. John said, "You have heard that the Antichrist will come, but even now there are many Antichrists." 1 John 2, verse 18. And just as we have heard that the mark will come, even now there are many marks. What does Germany call its money? If we continue to put our faith in money and to work for it, we play right into the hands of the Antichrist. We can say we will refuse to take the final mark when it comes, but we will almost certainly use the same excuses for taking it then as we use for disobeying everything else that Jesus said about money now. Revelation 7, verses 3 to 8, says that God's people also have a mark. And Jesus refers to this in John 6, verse 27, when he says, "Do not work for the food that perishes." Jesus says our refusal to worry about material needs will set us apart from the rest of the world. See Matthew 6, verses 31 to 33. But the churches say, we would starve if we took that literally. Jesus says, sell what you own and give to the poor. See Luke 12, verse 33. And they say, he will forgive us if we don't follow that rule. Jesus says, if you don't forsake everything you own, you cannot be one of my followers. See Luke 14, verse 33. And the churches say, times have changed. It won't work in today's world. Jesus says, teach others to obey all that I have said. Matthew 28, verses 19 to 20. And they say, nobody else is doing it, so why should we? So, when he says, whoever receives the mark will feel the full strength of God's wrath, Revelation 14, verses 9 to 11, those who boast now that they will never take it will say, oh, we got away with disobeying everything else Jesus said. Why not ignore this one too? In conclusion, to sum it up, there's going to be a world government, and it's going to bring in a universal mark that will greatly improve the efficiency of banking, law enforcement, immigration, and related fields. Eventually, the government will turn nasty and will execute literally millions of people. But that could be a long way down the track. In the meantime, this new government and the new economic system it institutes is going to be a massive improvement on anything we have at the moment. No matter what anyone does to protest against the mark, it will still come. Practically everyone will accept it, and you will almost certainly be one of those who does. The only exceptions will be those who have taken the teachings of Jesus very seriously. If you're not more interested in knowing what Jesus taught than the Queen of Sheba was in knowing the wisdom of Solomon, remember, she paid tons of gold to hear what he had to say. Then forget about it. You're pretty well destined to take the mark anyway, and you may as well eat, drink, and be merry until the end comes. Of course, if you are interested in following the teachings of Jesus, you can find them in the first 4 books of the New Testament. The Gospel according to Matthew, according to Mark, according to Luke, and according to John. Study them and obey them like your eternal life depends on it, because it does. The 12 Tribes. Reference to the 12 tribes, or the 144,000, in the Revelation appears, at first glance, to be obviously talking about the 12 tribes of Israel. Because of that, many people have tried to build theories about Bible prophecy, which make the Virgin Army of Revelation 7 something other than the Christian Church. The problem is that such theories are based only on a superficial reading of the passage, a reading which both overlooks the bigger picture and overlooks the finer details as well. The bigger picture being discussed here takes 2 forms. One is the overall Christian message, and the other is the overall fruit of any theory based on the 144,000, or the 12 tribes of the Revelation being the Jews. Strangely enough, every time people, including the Jews themselves, have taken a purely physical, that is, genetic approach to the chosen people, it has borne bad fruit. It has led to racism amongst Jews who have taken that approach, and it has led to racism against Jews by Gentiles who have taken that approach. To start with, the 144,000 cannot come from the Jews as we know them today, because the Jews are only one tribe, or two if you count Benjamin, out of the original 12 tribes that descended from Jacob, who was later called Israel. We get the name Jew from the tribe that they primarily represent, the tribe of Judah. The other 10 tribes disappeared through intermarriage with the system during various captivities. There is no way to resurrect them in a physical sense. To illustrate that, imagine there was just a handful of blacks left in the world and they all intermarried with whites. They would have children with dark skin, but not with entirely black skin. Their children would then intermarry for generation after generation, until finally there would be no black people left in the world. Certain genes would still be there, scattered out all over the earth, but the only way to get those genes back together again would be to locate all the people who had them and make sure that they only married each other for generation after generation, until you had made the black gene dominant once again in a handful of people. It would take as long to rebuild the blacks as it took for them to be dispersed. The same would be true for any plan to resurrect the lost tribes of Israel. Theoretically, this is possible, but it is totally contrary to the overall message of the New Testament. Considering that one of the fundamental lessons of the New Testament is that God was trying to build a nation of people who had the faith of Abraham and not his genes, it is rather obvious that God is not interested in the genetic resurrection of Israel, which is something we would never be able to appreciate anyway, since there would be no human way to know who had all the genes, even if God were to put the tribes back together again himself. What God is interested in is the spiritual resurrection of Israel. The original tribes included converts from the rest of the world, so that God was not even interested in genetic purity the first time around. A tribe was just a form of organization, and did not need to be restricted to descendants of a particular person. Let's assume for a moment, however, that God actually wanted to bring together the genes without destroying the free choice of people at this end of history, so that it just happened that those of us who choose to follow Jesus actually were the genetically restored tribes of Israel. As mentioned above, there would be no way to prove the theory anyway, so it would just be a theory. But it would have to be a racist theory, because it would outlaw any blacks, any Asians, etc., since they obviously aren't flesh Israelites. All the members of the 144,000 would have to have the same racial characteristics. Is that consistent with the Christian message? On top of that, even though God could bring all the Abrahamic genes together, he could not, because of our free will, guarantee that anyone with those genes was going to make the right spiritual choice this time around, any more than they did the last time around. It seems far more likely that God has brought about such a complete destruction of the tribes of Israel as to make it overwhelmingly clear that he is through with them forever. It is the spiritual Jerusalem, that which has come down from heaven, see Revelation 21 verse 2, that he is building now. Another interesting little quirk about the tribes listed in the Revelation is that they are not the original 12 tribes. Revelation 7 verses 4 to 8, cross-referenced with Genesis 49 verses 1 to 28, you'll see that the tribe of Dan has been left out, and the tribe of Joseph has been put in Dan's place. Joseph was, of course, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. However, his single tribe was originally given 2 names, after his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, sometimes giving the impression that there were 13 original tribes. In the list in the Revelation, Manasseh is a tribe in its own right, in addition to a tribe called the tribe of Joseph. Ephraim is not mentioned at all, but it could be assumed that the tribe of Joseph is really the tribe of Ephraim, thus giving Joseph 2 tribes and Dan none. It is not clear why Dan was left out. Maybe it's just something that God did to frustrate anyone trying to build a tidy little theory based on the original 12 tribes. A more spiritual argument against the 144,000 being flesh Israel is to look at the fruit that comes from such a theory. We've already mentioned that it seems to be the basis for a lot of racism, for example, the British Israel theory, which says that white Anglo-Saxons are the resurrected 12 tribes. But it also seems to be the basis of a feeling of hopelessness on the part of those exempted from the 12 tribes. What seems more likely and more consistent with the overall message of the New Testament is that we still can join the 144,000, whether we are Israelis or not, whether we are males or not, whether we have engaged in sex in the past or not. What matters is the future. Are we going to keep ourselves away from that whore, Babylon? If so, then we need to purify ourselves in the blood of the Lamb and start building that army right now. Amen? The 144K Army, Part 1. The 7th chapter of the Revelation, about the army of 144,000 people, has, like so much of the Revelation, been ignored by most Christians on the basis that it could be misinterpreted by fanatics to make them think they are part of the army and others are not. How silly. At the very least, we need to take more seriously the lessons which are implied in the overall passage, since they probably will relate to us at some time in the future. We shouldn't just tear that chapter out of the Bible because it may be misunderstood. What lessons are these? For starters, there is the fact that these 144,000 people are virgins, which were not defiled with women. There is a liberal, highly spiritualized interpretation of this passage, in the same way that there are with other passages in the New Testament about celibacy, suggesting that people could be married without it affecting their ability to work for God, so long as they didn't have children. There is truth in both of these more spiritualized teachings, which will be looked at in a bit more detail later in the study. One danger with these teachings is that couples can use them to avoid other parts of the Bible that are much clearer about our need to forsake our spouses and children for God. And, having taken that first step to get married, it would not be a big surprise for them to fall away from literal obedience to just about anything else that Jesus taught. There isn't any point in forbidding marriage, as the Catholics do for their leaders, since the Bible teaches that such a doctrine is wrong. But we should be doing what the Bible does, and be fairly certain about telling people where marriage is likely to lead them. Chances are that if a single who is fully dedicated to God gets married, they will not continue to be such a radical, 100% sold-out, red-hot warrior for Christ. It doesn't have to be that way, but there is a good chance that that will be the outcome. This thought could reinforce the notion that the army of 144,000 may in fact be literal virgins, who have kept themselves from women. I would still question the virginity thing a bit, as a literal condition that excludes for life anyone who has ever had sex. It probably means something more along the lines of holy people who have been set aside for the Master's use, and who stubbornly refuse to let sex distract them from God's will. It may even be that a married person could become part of that army, but the conditions would still be pretty strict. Paul says to the Corinthians, "The time remains that those who have wives should be as though they had none." In other words, there may be an option for those who are married to still make it into the army, but the only way it could be done would be by very seriously, and perhaps very literally, forsaking their spouses. The Catholic Church is something along those lines, where a married man can become a priest by literally leaving his wife. The system in general is shocked by it, but the Catholics still do it, and I think that is just a small sample of what God is wanting us to do. What Paul said is echoed by Jesus when he says that no man can come after him unless he is willing to hate his wife. This approach does not require people to justify themselves to any of their friends, colleagues, relatives, or other system authorities. All of these people unanimously despise authority, whether it be a Christian's, God's, or anyone else's, except their own. They are not convinced, as a true follower of Christ would be, that they have found the answer in the teachings of Jesus. They do not regard his teachings as the pearl of great price for which they would sell all that they own. It doesn't mean that people shouldn't try to be friendly to these people, but it is important to remember, Fence-sitters are never neutral, although they always pretend they are. In fact, they are usually the most dangerous of friends. All of these people are governed by a social conscience, that is, a need to be accepted in the eyes of others. Often, even their occasional niceties are carefully calculated to prove something to you, to each other, and/or to the system. What the point is that people must at least be willing to cut their ties with all of these vestiges of respectability that each of their system and family friendships represents, and to spiritually disappear, if need be, into the great unknown in the way of all so-called cults. It is the willingness of any group to cut all ties with their families and with the system that gets them labelled a cult in the first place. But it is the same willingness that makes them so effective. It may be time for others to discover the same effectiveness. If the Virgin Army only includes those who have kept themselves from women, that is, bachelors to the rapture, then all of these guys who are being led around by their wives are out before they even start. It may even mean that the remaining married couples are, at best, only going to be part of some kind of an army auxiliary, shouting encouragement to the rest of the army from the sidelines. Nevertheless, if that is the standard, then that is what must be preached, and toward which we should aspire. It is only the grace of God that may allow some individuals to be part of the Virgin Army. But his grace will only be made available to those who are prepared to acknowledge what the standards at least should be. And those standards include forsaking spouses and children for Christ. It is like what can happen with remarried divorcees. It may be okay for couples that have been remarried for many years to remain together, as long as they would teach that in principle what they did was wrong, that is, that they should not have remarried after being divorced. But often people just want to make the standard fit their own conduct, rather than make their conduct, or at least the conduct of those whom they might influence, come closer to the standard. And so there may be a flat refusal to teach such a principle. It is important that this does not happen with regard to the Virgin Army. If forsaking spouses and children is the standard, then so be it. If it is understood that this concept of being virgins and being separate from women is part of a direction on the continuum, and something that spiritually reflects every area of our life, then we should be teaching it, and doing all that we can to start practicing it now. Whether or not we ever qualify for membership in the army ourselves, we, sons and daughters of God, need to be totally sold out to God the Father, so that no beguiling spirit or spirit of Eve can come between us and him. Those that are married should be as though they were not in this regard. Such a doctrine can only be taught by recognizing the legitimacy of masturbation. That is a vital key that has been left out by most people who teach celibacy. Because it has been left out, sexual hypocrisy and perversion has resulted. Note, even the anti-masturbation teaching is a product of the Jezebel influence in the churches, where mothers dictated what was right and wrong for their sons, rather than honest fathers. By accepting masturbation, married people can even accept being separated from their spouses for Christ. Being a virgin does not mean that you are asexual, but by practicing masturbation, you do not have to let your sexual needs dictate your lifestyle. Our sexual needs are like many other biological needs, that is, just biological. No one can stop going to the toilet for God, but it can be agreed upon to not do so in public, for example, without feeling that it is an impossible ethic to follow. And the same is true of sex. Ejaculation is a biological need, but it can be agreed upon to not engage in illegitimate sex, and agreed upon that it will not compromise a person in their spiritual walk. So what about singles who may want to marry? It cannot be forbidden for any of them to marry, but if they do, it's very likely they will end up feeling more comfortable working with people who don't have the vision for staying single in the end times. If you wish to grow, quite literally, toward the vision of being part of the Virgin Army, it means not being afraid of appearing to be cultish, which just ends up in your hands being tied spiritually. It would mean being controlled by the spirit of Jezebel, usually in the form of our own spouses. This situation exists throughout all the churches, where there is hardly a leader anywhere who has control over his own family. The sin isn't that they married, but that in the important spiritual decisions that these husbands must make, they are defiled by women, that is, by their emotional dependence on their wives. Because they feel they cannot live without their wives, they become wimps for God. Under such conditions, they cannot do anything but teach that rebellious wives must be tolerated by the rest of the community. This is not about hating women, but the devil is always going to take the one you love most and use that person to pull you away from God, and this should not be tolerated. If someone wants to insist that they bring their spouse into line, they're going to be faced with the possibility that their spouse will refuse to have sex with them, or leave them if they try to take a hard line with them, and that is when they will find out both what their spouses are made of and what they are made of. While operating under some perverted doctrine of grace, where no demands need to be made on spouses, it will never be clear what they are capable of spiritually. But when the law of God is laid down, they're either going to submit and become true followers of Christ, or they are going to rebel and show themselves to be the agents of the devil. Certainly, if anyone is considering marriage, it would be a lot easier to lay the law down to begin with, when rebellion from the potential spouse will leave the person open to marry someone else someday, or, better still, to be part of the Virgin Army. Just ruling marriage out as a recommended option does not rule it out as a possibility. But, as St. Paul said, the people who get married are going to be faced with incredible temptations that will very likely make them pretty much ineffectual for God. It may be that in some hypothetical situation, God himself could actually encourage a person to get married. But if that is true, then it is up to God to make it clear. The instructions we have from Scripture are that it's better to stay single, and we should discourage marriage as a general principle. If you can't handle being single, then go ahead. But, as Paul said, there are going to be problems. In the meantime, rather than looking for potential marriage partners, why not go looking for more people who are committed to staying single for God, to add to the army? For they are the ones who are going to make the Virgin Army cult most effective. God bless you. The 144K Army, Part 2. With regard to the Virgin Army of 144,000, here are some comments about the concept of literal physical virgins as opposed to spiritual virgins. At the same time that we need to take more seriously the call to be physical virgins, we must be careful to keep it in proper perspective to the spiritual nature of this army. Remember that what God is most looking for is a holy church. Holiness includes far more than sexual chastity. There are some psychologically screwed up guys who hate women because of their own sinfulness. Possibly Jack the Ripper or some other famous serial killer was supposed to have been like that, always killing prostitutes or women he thought were prostitutes, because he wanted to put the blame on them for his own lust. As Tolstoy pointed out, when the Bible says, "Who are you that judges another for committing adultery, when you yourselves are guilty of murder?" it was probably talking about the spirit of the Pharisees, who brought the woman caught in adultery to Jesus and wanted to stone her to death. Obviously, not many people are guilty of what we traditionally think of as murder. But because Jesus taught that hate was as bad as murder, he was showing that just hating an adulterous person and feeling self-righteous about it is as bad as murder, and it is worse than the adultery itself. By all means, hate the Jezebel spirit, but don't hate women. Jesus gave murder a spiritual meaning that is quite different to the traditional understanding we have of it. And he did the same with adultery, which is something that we must take into consideration when trying to understand the principles of the Virgin Army. Read Luke 16, verses 12 to 19, and you'll see that sandwiched in between all this talk about greed is a sudden reference to adultery and divorce. Without going into other supports for this theory just now, it seems that what Jesus is talking about here is spiritual adultery, which comes when someone turns from Christ to the beast, or stops being the bride and becomes the harlot, chasing after money instead of trusting God. Obviously, there is a connection between the literal and the spiritual, and so it makes sense that there is a connection between being literal, physical virgins, and being spiritual virgins. But the spiritual meaning is the most important one to get. Sex is not the root of all evil, whereas the love of money is. It's just that the devil will use sex to sidetrack us when he cannot get through to us through greed. The husband does not have to be greedy if he is being controlled sexually by a wife who is greedy. Ephesians 5 verses 25 to 27 says that Christ loved the church and died for it, and he also gave it the truth in his teachings, so that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. Obviously, none of us is holy and without blemish in our own strength. To become such, we must be washed. Revelation 14 verses 4 to 5 says of the 144,000, "These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God." The word we should take note of here is that they were redeemed. In other words, they were brought back from some fallen state. The traditional understanding of virginity is that once you've lost it, and you can never get it back. This is not necessarily the case with spiritual things. Let's face it, none of us, not even those who are sexual virgins, is worthy to be part of the 144,000, because none of us is perfect. But the Lamb can make us worthy in his strength. He can make us virgins too, if we were not virgins before undergoing his regeneration. Also notice that the verse says that these people were not defiled by women. Yet the Bible says that the marriage bed is undefiled. Hebrews 13 verse 4. Someone who has only had sex with his wife is not defiled according to that passage. Yet he is defiled by no longer being a virgin, if we are to take the usual approach to the word virgin in Revelation 14 verse 4. This is a strong argument for the theory that the Virgin Army may include married people. It would also make sense that it includes women, as the word men is usually used in the Bible in the sense of all people. But that is another topic, which we will not go into at this time. Jesus told a parable about his second coming, which talked of wise virgins and foolish virgins, who were waiting for him to come and for the wedding to begin. This is the feminine equivalent of the Virgin Army. In the Revelation, these virgins are spoken of as one body. They're called the bride of Christ, or the church. Revelation 19 verses 7 to 9 says, "Let us be glad and rejoice and give honour to God, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife has made herself ready. To her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of saints. And he saith unto me, Write, Blessed are they which are called unto the marriage supper of the Lamb." In Revelation 21 verse 2, John says, "I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." In verse 9, he says that an angel says to him, "Come hither, and I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife." Strangely, what follows is a description of a city. Most of us have come to think of the city as a physical city, where we will live and walk. But actually, the city only symbolizes the bride, the church, the Virgin Army. Call it what you like. The Revelation talks of 12 tribes and of a city, and in both cases it gives measurements that are all based on 12s, 144, and thousands. Before the end of this article, it has to be said that it is not 100% clear that technical non-virgins, for example married people, can be part of the Virgin Army. It's just a theory. However, in Revelation 7 verse 9, there is mention of a second group, which no man could number, whose robes have also been made white in the blood of the Lamb. It could be that this second group includes those who are won over to Jesus by the testimony of the Virgin Army during the Great Tribulation. Or it could be all those through the ages who have been faithful to Christ. Or there may in fact be two separate groups, one of which does not qualify for the Virgin Army, possibly because they've engaged in sex, but which has also been made holy by the blood of the Lamb. What is important is that we understand that no one is exempt from needing the blood of the Lamb. Just being sexually virgin does not mean a person does not need the grace of God for areas of sin in their lives. We all need to repent, be forgiven, and be recreated into new people who are spotless and holy before God. Certainly a message of holiness needs to be preached today more than ever, as people are abusing the concept of God's grace more than ever. And sexual immorality is one of the most obvious visible results of the false teaching in the church about God's grace. So the hard line of the Virgin Army and injunctions against divorce and remarriage will be an important part of returning to the standards that God demands. These teachings are extremely unpopular, but in taking this hard line, let us also be careful that we do not make sexual virginity the only standard by which we delineate between the good guys and the not so good guys. There is a great deal in the teachings of Jesus to suggest that the real delineation has more to do with our attitudes towards love and money. God bless you all, and stay faithful to the Lamb, whithersoever he goeth. Maintaining the 144K perspective. With regard to the 144K vision of remaining single for Christ, there is a need to do something to help people who are struggling with it. The truth is, however, that we do not really need to have more written on the subject, but we do probably need to do more sharing about it with others. The reason for this is because what probably happens when people start to lose the vision is just that the devil has gotten in and clouded our thinking about how simple the vision really is. He makes us think that the 144K vision is something that it is not. That it is, in fact, a bit unreasonable. Most people with a vision for the 144K army are smart enough and informed enough that if they just sat down themselves and tried to write something on the topic, or if they started to share with others about exactly what the 144K vision is, they would find their vision getting stronger almost automatically. In other words, it isn't so much a matter of a commitment to the vision that is fading, as it is an understanding of the vision that is fading. One problem is that we can talk about the issues in a simplified way, without thinking things through clearly. Sometimes we could be confident about our resolve to stay single without recognizing our limitations. But we can also be too cautious about our resolve because we're not recognizing how easy it is to maintain the vision. If we allow ourselves to get into the system mindset, which is that everyone is more or less entitled to a lifetime of sexual activity with one or more sexual partners, then the idea of a lifetime without sexual activity sounds like an almost impossible sacrifice. On the other hand, the true 144K vision does not eliminate all sexual activity. That is, it does not eliminate masturbation. But it does take a very long, hard, cold look at exactly what sexual activity with a partner involves. Obviously, someone who is masturbating could easily think that it would be great to have the real thing. If that was the only concern, then the answer would, of course, be yes. If you can find a sexual partner, then do so. It's more fun. But from the Christian perspective, even if we did have the real thing, it would involve some overwhelming sacrifices and disciplines that do not often enter our heads when we are just thinking about all of the cuddlies that we are missing. That is the deceptive power of the cuddlies. That is the real Jezebel spirit. Maybe there needs to be an article like this on the pricklies, no pun intended, or something like that which reminds us of all the discomforts that come with a married commitment. There is the lack of freedom because you are tied to someone else, for better or for worse, for the rest of your life. There is the pain that comes when the other person does not live up to your expectations. There is the heartbreak that comes if the other person backslides, in which case you lose your freedom to ever consider marriage again. And, of course, there are the restrictions on your usefulness for God, possibly even meaning disqualification from the Virgin Army, although it's not certain what that means exactly. Of course, knowing that marriage is not forbidden should actually make it easier to maintain the 144K vision too. Think how much harder it must be for a divorcee for whom remarriage is forbidden. At least while you remain single, your options stay open. Once you are married, there is no turning back. It does seem like any sincere Christian, with any understanding of what the Bible and what Jesus in particular says about the advisability of remaining single, who then says that they are totally indifferent to whether they stay married or single, or who is actively seeking to get married, must not have really thought the issues through. It's almost like saying that you're indifferent to using drugs, or that you are actively looking for opportunities to use drugs. The drugs are not immoral in themselves, but why on earth should we be indifferent to something that we know is not going to be good for us? Likewise, it is concerning when marrieds choose to ignore the scripture about it being time for those who are married to be as though they were not. See 1 Corinthians 7 verse 29. We may not all come to the same conclusion about how to apply that passage, but to ignore it altogether seems strange for anyone who is sincere. A similar problem happens with regard to Bible prophecy in general. Anyone who looks into prophecy will almost certainly be wrong in some of their expectations with regard to how it is all going to be fulfilled. But the answer is not to ignore Bible prophecy altogether, as so many have done. And yet, if we allow serious doubts to creep in with regard to our thinking about Bible prophecy and the 144K vision, before long we will be completely turned off to anything that has to do with Bible prophecy and the 144K vision. The thinking can be that because someone doesn't know everything about those two subjects, then we are entitled to ignore them altogether. Wrong. There is room for opinions with regard to some of the details, but there is not room for tossing either issue, celibacy or Bible prophecy, out. Yet it's so easy to start thinking that way when we let the devil come in and cloud the issues. It's one of the easiest areas of deception that he has, where he lures you into a more respectable approach to marriage and the second coming, and then leads you, step by step, away from any discipline at all that you find irritating or inconvenient. Hopefully people will not just read this and forget it. Hopefully it will spark discussion and thought about what the 144K vision really is. Not discussion about anything new or complicated or bizarre, but discussion about how simple the vision is. That is, that of the two choices, married or single, the preferred option is to remain single. The gift of prophecy. We have been criticized by some Christians for focusing too much on Bible prophecy and not saying enough about the love of God. This article explores 5 reasons why people shy away from dealing with prophecy and why they criticize those of us who teach it. Some reasons are more understandable than others. Number 1, fear. Sharing our beliefs, especially around spiritual matters, can be daunting. Often, rather than face those fears, we can make excuses for our silence. Criticizing the beliefs of others who are more confident about sharing them can be a convenient excuse for us not sharing our own beliefs. It is worth examining ourselves to be sure that our reaction against what others are saying about Bible prophecy is not being used as a mask for our own fear, pride, laziness, or some other bad spirit, resulting in us hiding our faith from others. It is wise to question the beliefs of others, including our own, but to do so most effectively requires that we listen carefully to what the other people are saying first. If, after doing so, we are still convinced that they are going about the subject in the wrong way, one option is to produce our own outreach material, tracts, videos, etc., focusing on what we think are the most important issues. It may be that in attempting to do this our position shifts, or it may be that we come up with something that genuinely helps and inspires others. Number 2. Bad press. A concern about prophecy, which is more understandable, is that it is often associated with kooks or religious fanatics who distort prophecy for selfish gain, often to win converts, make money, or induce fear. Each time someone sets a date, for example for Jesus' return, which passes without being fulfilled, more confusion and disillusionment results. This leads many people to avoid the subject of prophecy altogether. But how safe is this? Just because the subject of prophecy is abused should not stop us from exploring it sincerely. The solution is not to reject the subject, but to ensure that our motivation for engaging with it is right. We need to ask ourselves whether we are trying too hard to make a prophecy say something, to conform to our theories or biases, or whether we are genuinely looking for ways to understand and act on whatever the prophecy is actually saying. Skepticism about prophecy can hinder otherwise sincere believers from exploring how world developments are lining up with the bigger picture. It takes mental effort to sift through the many false doctrines about prophecy that are out there. But doing nothing about finding the truth, in the midst of all this confusion, allows the false prophets to win by default. Number 3. Delays. Some cynicism relating to the subject of prophecy is due to the fact that, by its very nature, it deals with things that have not happened yet. The Bible describes faith as the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. See Hebrews 11, verse 1. Dealing with the unknown and acting on the basis of a prophecy takes considerable trust, and many people's trust in modern-day prophets has been shaken due to clearly false predictions being made, as touched on in the preceding point. Again, the answer is not to reject the whole subject of prophecy, but to ground our trust in something more solid than spurious predictions made by isolated individuals. We do this by lining everything up with the cornerstone, Jesus and his teachings, ensuring that we don't take anything out of context. If we faithfully do this, we will be more likely to discern whether a prophecy is true or false. See Hebrews 4, verse 12. The gift of prophecy is open to abuse, and Jesus warned that false prophets would appear directly before his return, doing just this. See Matthew 24, verse 24. It's wise to question people, especially those who have not been tried and tested. In contrast, we can have more confidence in prophecies Jesus and the early disciples gave us, even if some of them have been a long time coming true. Over 350 Old Testament prophecies were fulfilled in the New Testament, which should give us a bit more confidence that the prophecies from the New Testament are likely to be fulfilled as well. If something has been prophesied by an authority like Jesus, it is wise to consider that he went to the trouble of informing us for our own benefit. What do we have to lose by carefully listening to what he said and seeking to understand what it may mean to us personally and corporately? Also, just because something has not happened yet does not mean that it will never happen. We are living in an age where prophecy and reality are more visibly merging, with the prediction in Revelation 13, verses 16 to 18 being a good example of this. People who claimed just a few decades ago that this prophecy was only symbolic have needed to re-examine their position with the arrival of an implantable microchip for humans that has already been used for buying and selling on a small scale since 2004, something John the Revelator predicted almost 2,000 years ago. Number 4. Doom and gloom. Many people wrongly assume that Bible prophecy is all about doom and gloom, and that proponents of it are responsible for filling people's heads with fears and doubts. Notions of death and judgment are challenging, but they should not cause us to run away from such realities. Considering death and meeting our Maker can be the point at which we start to truly live. Some people argue that we should not worry about the future, and that we should just get busy living in the present. On first glance, this sounds positive and supports what Jesus said in Matthew 6, verse 34. However, it is wise to question a person's motivation for using this argument, especially when it hinders a balanced discussion of prophecy. Do we, for example, worry about how we will survive even now because of our attachment to money? If so, then maybe confronting doom and gloom is the first step in freeing us from this. Jesus' resurrection and return is fundamental to Christianity. If Jesus was resurrected, it means we can be resurrected too. Jesus said, "He that loses his life for my sake shall find it." See Matthew 10, verse 39. Facing our fear of death and learning to die to self cannot be separated from the Christian walk. The Great Tribulation is measurably linked to the return of Jesus. Jesus' resurrection and return is fundamental to Christianity. If Jesus was resurrected, it means we can be resurrected too. Jesus said, "He that loses his life for my sake shall find it." Matthew 10, verse 39. Facing our fear of death and learning to die to self cannot be separated from the Christian walk. The Great Tribulation is measurably linked to the return of Jesus, when he will defeat evil and establish his kingdom on earth. It is the one time when we will be able to confidently set an actual date for the return of Jesus, and as such, it is inseparable from our greatest hope as Christians. See Revelation 21, verses 3 to 7. True, it is often darkest just before the dawn, But if the rising of the sun is what the darkness is all about, then we can joyfully say, bring it on. The second coming of Jesus marks the end of all oppression and injustice. This is good news for those of us who have accepted Jesus. He's coming back to wipe away all tears from the eyes of his servants. We just need to be certain that we are his servants by following his example of love. Jesus not only said that he is coming back, he also said that his kingdom is within us now. See Luke 17, verse 21. Are we frightened of thinking about Jesus' return because we don't wish to be judged by his teachings today? See John 12, verse 48. The best form of future preparation is present and continual surrender. Imagining the future can help us in the present, and surrendering to Christ now naturally prepares us for his return. Jesus refers to himself as the beginning and the end. The way to understand the end of all things is to understand the beginning of all things. As we draw closer to the end, circumstances will necessitate a return to the simplicity of the message Christ gave right at the start. Cross-reference Hebrews 10 verse 25 with Acts 4 verses 32 to 35, for example. This leads us to the final section. Number 5. Where is the gospel message? Some Christians say we've left out the gospel message from what we teach, an assertion we strongly refute. For many churchgoers, the gospel message is summed up in John 3:16. However, believing in Jesus is much more than simply believing in his existence or his death and resurrection. It is about doing our best to obey what he taught. See John 14, verse 15. We feel it is this churchy gospel which has left out the full truth of the gospel of Christ. Many professing Christians view prophetic texts like the Revelation as being separate from the real gospel message. Worse still, they tend to see everything that Jesus taught in the Gospels as being contrary to the so-called gospel message too. The opening of the Revelation says, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass." See Revelation 1, verse 1. The book is clearly for servants of Jesus Christ. The decision to ignore this message, or even go so far as to condemn those of us who share it with others, clearly comes from a spirit other than Christ. Prophetic teachings of Jesus contained within the four Gospels and the Revelation are, of course, an important part of the gospel message. At what point does something contained within the words of Jesus stop being a part of the gospel? When Jesus said, "Repent and believe the gospel," see Mark 1 verse 15, he meant the whole message. If we focus on one teaching to the exclusion of others, or we add and subtract from the message, we clearly do not believe the gospel. This places us in a spiritually precarious position. See Matthew 5 verse 19 and Revelation 22 verses 18 to 19. The revelation can be challenging to unravel, but this should not stop us from trying. We are given a vital clue as to how to unravel this book and all prophecy when the angel said to John, "The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy." See Revelation 19 verse 10. By seeking to understand and follow the teachings of Jesus, in other words, being a servant, the mystery and spirit of prophecy is revealed. For example, a sincere follower of Jesus will take what he said about not being able to serve God and mammon, see Matthew 6 verse 24, and will understand how this lines up with the prophecy about the cashless society. See Revelation 13 verses 16 to 18. The Antichrist uses mammon to enslave people, whereas Jesus sets us free from working for money, which enables us to refuse the mark of the beast when it becomes impossible to buy and sell without it. Jesus said that many of his teachings were given to help prepare us. See John 16 verses 1 and verse 4. Jesus also instructs us to love others the way he loves us. See John 13 verse 34. Therefore, any talk of love, or the gospel message, which neglects what we need to do in order to be prepared and prepare others, is simply not the kind of love Jesus taught. We are deeply concerned that the public are actively being primed to accept the Antichrist and his deceptions, with much of the church world falling into this category, either by allowing themselves to be deceived or by participating in the deception. Misconception about the true gospel message is a part of this overall deception. Most Christians are being taught to say, Lord, Lord, but they are not being taught about Jesus' instructions, either in theory or in practice. See Luke 6, verses 46 to 49. For example, Jesus instructs us to sell our possessions and give the proceeds to the poor. See Luke 12, verse 33. To share the message with others. See Matthew 28, verses 19 to 20. And to trust that God will look after us each day. See Matthew 6, verses 25 to 34. What better preparation is there than this, both for the time in which we live and for service in Jesus' kingdom when he returns? In recent years, we have placed a stronger emphasis on Bible prophecy, with a variety of materials being produced on the subject. This has been done for two main reasons. One, the materials explore developments happening before our eyes in order to help make people aware. And two, they point to Christ's solution of living by faith in order to help people prepare. We continue to witness a serious gap in the market, with many churches preaching love, forgiveness, the sinner's prayer, health and wealth, signs and wonders, etc. But with very few churches teaching people to actually follow Jesus' example, especially when it challenges the status quo. World developments reveal that we are on the threshold of the most challenging period in human history. If we are about to be thrown into a serious war zone, going into denial is not going to help anyone. What is needed is clear vision and thorough preparation. More than ever, people need to recognize and demonstrate love in action as defined by Jesus Christ. This is the true gospel of the kingdom, which needs to be preached to every living creature before Jesus Christ returns. Matthew 24, verse 14. Conclusion. We hope this article goes some way in helping you work through any doubts or concerns you may have regarding the subject of Bible prophecy. As we have shown, the spirit of prophecy and the teachings of Christ are one and the same. Unfortunately, our experience to date has been that few people wish to embrace this truth, resulting in a serious lack of spiritual and practical preparation. In recognizing this, we hope readers will be more ready to accept that God may be leading us to get out there with our prophetic message to help readdress this problem. We also hope that some of you will feel inspired to help us with this urgent and important mission while there is still time.